We're standing here in the Rapid Transit Bike Shop in Wicker Park because I was invited by you or Bighorn here to participate in this video, which has to do with the bike culture in Chicago, is my understanding. So Eric called me, and I guess he thinks that I must have something to say about bike culture in Chicago. And the only reason I would have more to say than maybe other people is because I was in the early beginnings. I was one of the people that started the Critical Mass in Chicago 3 years ago in 1997.
What is Critical Mass?
Critical Mass is a worldwide movement it's a bicycle activist movement. It's not a club. It's not sponsored by anybody. It's not really athletic. It's a way for people to come together and demonstrate to the public at large that bicycling is a viable alternative to driving, for commuting, for going to the store, for running errands, not just for recreation, not just for athletics. So we started that in '97, the Daily Plaza in September, and since then that's when the real bike culture in Chicago, I think, that's when it started growing. I mean, before that, I didn't know anybody that, I biked to work, I biked to the store and biked a lot, but I really didn't know anybody else that did it as much as I did. But as soon as we had that first Critical Mass ride, all of a sudden there were dozens, and there were over 100 people that showed up, and ever since then we've all been formed some kind of a close-knit, informal group of people that like to ride their bikes, have a lot in common. We ride, we've been involved not only in just the rides, but some more formal activist events trying to promote cycling. So I think.
What are those events that you're talking about?
Well, Critical Mass itself is nobody is really in charge of it. So there's no formal organization. So if you decide there are enough people here and you want to actually accomplish something, try to influence policy or do something to really maybe influence politics somehow, then you can't really do it because Critical Mass is not a formal organization. So we started something called Break the Gridlock, and we had a conference last September where we actually got nonprofit status. There were a group of people that had met through Critical Mass, and we had a conference. We had 130 people there. We had some well-known national figures come and talk about bicycling, public transit, people talking about how expensive it is to have a car and how much, people would. Basically, the advantages of bicycling, not only just for the individual, but also for the urban environment itself. And so that's an example.
Tell me some of those. What are the benefits to the individual as well as to the urban environment?
Well, from my own perspective, the last car I had was a Ford station wagon. It was some kind of a country squire or something, V8. And I'd always felt, something uncomfortable or something. Like, I just felt there was something weird about hauling around so much weight, Although I'm a child of the 50s, and, I had my first car when I was 16. I used to work on cars and repair cars. And so cars was really part of the 50s culture when I was a teenager. So cars are a very important thing. But over the years, I began to feel uncomfortable, mostly, I think, from an efficiency standpoint. It just seemed to be very inefficient to carry so much weight around. But I didn't really express it to anybody. I didn't really talk to anybody, because I just felt this, because I didn't know anybody else that felt there was anybody else in the whole world that felt like that. So I eventually started riding my bike to work, but I still had my car, and the benefits, as you get older, the more you can exercise your lungs and your muscles, and the better off you are. Sort of keeps you feeling healthy, and I did it for that reason. Plus just a feeling of freedom and exhilaration, independence that you get on a bike that you don't get in a car. You're not bound to, the physical thing. You don't have to worry about somewhere to put it all the time. What are all the other reasons?
No insurance.
No insurance. It costs $6,000 or $7,000 a year just to maintain a car on the average. I don't know what I spent, but it's probably somewhere close to there. So that's money that can be better spent buying premium beer and stuff, and spent it other ways. And my wife sort of shares my feelings, so it was easy. She didn't offer any resistance. She likes to bike, and so then she started biking, and she bought a recumbent here in this very shop, actually. My son Adrian works in this shop. He was one of the first, he helped me actually start Critical Mass. He was he helped give out flyers. He was a messenger. And Jason, who just left, is a bike messenger. So it's sort of a biking family here. So, and what are the advantages? I don't know. You just feel a lot better. I mean, it's the freedom. It's the feeling of efficiency that you're not really using any more resources than you need to get from one place to the next. That's. I mean, I don't want to. I suppose you could. It's easy to get sort of self-righteous, and sometimes I feel that way. But then I think, well, you shouldn't really. Everybody has a right, as opposed to their own mode of transportation. But I just prefer bicycles, and I like to hang out with people that ride bicycles. We seem to share a lot more in common other than just a bicycle. The bicycle is like just a physical symbol of something else, some other attitude toward life in general, which usually has to do with living simpler and not spending a whole lot of money on things you don't need to spend money on. Sort of a liberal leftish political kind of thinking, but not real radical. I mean, not dogmatic about it, but an easygoing, comfortable friendship with a lot of people that we share a lot in common aside from just the bicycle itself. And Bighorn here is one of the friends actually that he was at the first ride, and that's how I didn't know who he was. I'd never seen him before, and he happened to have a big horn, some kind of an air horn at that first ride, and so we were nobody knew how to start the ride. There were 120 people in Daly Plaza, everybody looking at everybody else trying to figure out who was in charge and how do we start this thing, because we'd never done it before. So I looked around and saw this guy with this big horn, and I just said, okay, the horn will be the starting signal. So that's what we did. We used that horn. As soon as the horn went off, everybody started riding around, and that's how we started. So ever since then, there it's been called.
How's it evolved over the past 3 years?
Oh, it's grown. I mean, there are a lot more people involved. I mean, most of the rides in the summer, maybe 300 people. We hardly ever get more than 400. Maybe once we've gotten that many. So they have grown. I mean, we don't get thousands, but you're still talking about a fairly peripheral kind of event. It's not a mainstream event. It's not organized. It's not sponsored. So a lot of people are suspicious, and they don't really. They're afraid to participate in something that's not quite legal. Sometimes we ride through the streets as if we were a parade, but we don't have a parade permit, so we go through traffic lights sometimes. So. It's not. A lot of people have problems with that. But how it's evolved, I'd say over these 3 years, there have probably I bet there are 4,000 people that have, at one time or another, have ridden in one of these rides. So we have a website, we have a listserv, and so it hasn't. I don't know if it's changed too much. It might not have quite as hard an edge as it used to have. It's not quite as political. Sometimes it seems like it's getting more like a party and less confrontational, but then again, sometimes we do have a confrontational moment. So as far as how it's evolved, it's grown. We've gotten more self-confident. We don't worry when we go to a ride. We used to worry would there be anybody there. So, and there were a few of us that felt like if we weren't there, that the thing would fall apart. But now, obviously, the best thing about it is that it has a life of its own. It's not dependent on any one person or one group of people to keep it going.
How's the city receive it as an event?
It depends on which police district you're talking about. In general, there's no citywide. I mean, the mayor has not made any kind of pronouncement about a critical mass policy, so it's pretty much up to the police districts and actually the individual policemen. So, we have response from the bystanders, from people in cars. We have response from pedestrians. We have response from the police. And we have response from the media. So, for a while there, the police were giving us some problems in a certain district because they viewed us as causing a disturbance or blocking traffic. And there was one particular sergeant that They actually had organized a few ambushes where they actually trapped us at an intersection and arrested a number of people.
What were they arresting you for?
The actual charge, what was it?
Mob action?
Mob action, they were reaching. I mean, they couldn't really they weren't sure what the charge was, so they used mob action. But ultimately, all the convictions, I mean, nobody got convicted, so it was a matter of harassment. The first district, which is the Loop, which is where the rides start, and we spend a lot of our time, we've hardly ever had any problems with the police. A lot of times they'll help us go through intersections, they'll block traffic for us.
They're providing an escort or what?
Yes, they provide escorts. Yeah, so the thing about police, when they see that many people, it's a very strange sight to them. I mean, they could see, 500 cars or 1,000 cars leaving Soldier Field after a Bulls game. They cause at least as much problem and more of a problem than bikes. But cars are normal to them and bikes are unusual. So when they see that many bicyclists, they don't know what to do, and their problem is they feel like they need to do something, but they're not sure what it is they need to do. So they want to have control one way or the other. So one way to have control is to act as escorts. The other way to have control is to arrest people. So that's they one or the other. But most of the time they're escorts. So
Have you ever been arrested as part of some sort of bicycle events?
No. I've been pursued and chased, but I've never been caught. But so that's the police thing. The reception from the general public is always positive. The pedestrians, we give out flyers that describe what we're doing, and people cheer us, and they, so it looks like a party, like we're having a good time, and we are. And so that gets through. That message gets through to the people that are watching us. People in cars, in general, they're also positive. Sometimes if we block a car at a red light or block, a car's trying to get through, then we'll get some negative response from a car driver. And we try to deal with that the best we can if it arises. Try not to let it get out of control. The response from the media. Over the years, we've gotten very good, mostly positive media coverage, with the exception of a couple of things. It's been very positive. We had Tribune, Sun-Times, we've had TV. We were on Wild Chicago. That was very positive. So, and we have a number of people in our group that are pretty good with the media. So we've established over the years. We've established a number of contacts with people in various media. So they usually come out to our events and help us with that promotion.
Is the goal to get as many people as possible to those events, or it just sort of builds on itself, or what?
Well, if you one of the purposes of this is a public display of bicycling, to show that there are a lot of people that ride, more people than you think ride bikes, and they ride it all year round. They ride them to work. So the more people you can get out to demonstrate that, the better. So yeah, in general, that's one of the big things. The more people you get out, the better. I mean, at some point, it might get so large so that it might attract more police attention than is desirable. But that we haven't. In general, the more the better. We get more people involved.
Now, you arrived here tonight in the snow. What's it like riding your bike in the snow, in the evening, rush hour traffic?
Well, it's a little. You got to be careful. You just make sure you're dressed right. For one thing, I've noticed I got goggles, so my vision is clear. I've got weather-resistant clothing. I've got lights, flashers, and you have to be very careful. In general, when you're riding in the snow, you keep your weight back on the rear wheel, keep your weight off the front, so you don't get in a rut or something. And you just have to be, I wouldn't recommend it for somebody to just start biking to go out in weather like this. I mean, we've been doing this for years now, so not to say something couldn't happen, but after a while, you sort of get to where you can anticipate problems that might happen. So, yeah, no, it was great riding tonight. It was really nice. It feels good to ride by all the cars stuck in traffic. Yeah. That's one thing that makes me feel good about biking in the city, is passing up cars.
Do you ever feel self-righteous? Do you ever feel the need?
Yes, I feel self-righteous.
Tell me about it.
Well, if you know you're right, and you just know, just totally that you're doing the right thing, then the people that haven't come around your viewpoint, you can't help but have some negative feelings toward them. But you know you can't. I mean, it's a car culture. I mean, this is the way things are in this country, and most people really don't have a choice. I mean, people live in the suburbs and work in another, live in one suburb, work in another suburb, or live in parts of the city that are not served well by public transit. People are, they're too old or aren't able to ride a bike for whatever disability. Obviously, there are lots of reasons, but so I try to be too judgmental about it, and I think we're all sort of feel the same way, And it's really the car that it's not the people that drive the cars. It's really the car itself that we're trying to deal with. And
Explain that to me.
What are the economic? What is it that drives the car culture? What is it that makes people? Why do people need cars? Because people are pretty smart. They'll make, given the right information, people make usually good decisions. So the fact that people drive cars, make that decision, they don't make that decision in a vacuum. They make that decision because to them, in their viewpoint, that's the most logical way to get around. And it's certainly reinforced everywhere. I mean, it's peer pressure is reinforced in TV ads. Billboards. I mean, it's really a total car culture, and so it's really. I just think of people as victims, like I was a victim, like I was, when I was a kid. I mean, it was peer pressure. It was a big, that's how you got dates. If you didn't have a car, you couldn't get a date, or if you got the coolest car, we have get the best looking girls and get to cruise around, places.
Do you take your dates out on your bike now?
Well, I don't really date, but one of the bike winter classes is dating, bike dating. One of the people that rides with us has written a book about biking in the city, and he gives a class on how to date on a bike.
Tell me a little bit more about what you mean.
Oh, I mean, you need to talk to somebody else about it. I mean, somebody that's more into the dating thing. I don't know.
Don't sell yourself short here, Jim.
I mean, to me, I really would know what to do if I were in that position. I mean, but, to me, it was the back seat of a car to drive in. Like I had a '52 Chevrolet. And I wouldn't know what to do on a bicycle. I mean, as far as dating goes. But luckily, I'm not faced with that problem right now. But we were on something else. We were talking about the.
Well, let me ask you
the car culture. Yeah, the thing that there's a if you compare this country to other countries in Europe, Holland, Netherlands especially, and Denmark, they have much less car use, much more bicycle and public transit.
China, India.
China, right. And there are reasons in all those places why. In the case of the Netherlands, they actually, the government made a decision. That was a policy decision 40 years ago to encourage bicycling by building bicycle infrastructure, bike paths, bike roads, and that, I suppose Netherlands is more of it's easier to do something like that in more of a centralized, where it's more not quite as where free enterprise doesn't reign so freely as it does here, where government can make policy which affects the economic system. Here, it's very difficult for the government to interfere with capitalism. And Cuba's an example. I mean, obviously, Cuba, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Cuba lost its oil supply, and they were faced with the problem of how they were going to their transportation system. And so the government, being centralized, they made a decision to switch to bicycles, and they did. They just transformed their whole transportation system over to bicycles in a matter of a couple of years. So basically, the more I think about it and read and look around me, it's unbridled capitalism in this country that really makes it so hard for for decisions that don't yield immediate. Bicycles are not a big industry. A lot of people, aren't many people employed in the bicycle industry compared to the car industry. So there's tremendous pressure to maintain the car infrastructure and the subsidies to cars just by virtue of the economics of, if we lost that part of the economy, I mean, it would be disastrous for the economy. So mean, and I understand that, and you can't change anything overnight, and sometimes it feels sort of futile to do it. So we just try to. But so that's it's a.
So what do you think about that? If you accept that as a premise that car industry is so major in our economy, what sorts of ideas do you have? Not specifics, but general ideas about, it's the same with a war machine, right? So how do you get past that and acknowledge the needs of the economy and at the same time acknowledge the larger benefits and perspective?
Well, I'm not really in a position, I'm not in a policy-making position, and I'm not really familiar with how policy gets made, and that's one thing that I admit my ignorance of, and that's one reason I do what I do. It's more of a out in the street, grassroots activist thing rather than dealing with the realities of how to change policy. I don't know. It takes enlightened politicians who have a vision beyond the next election. Mayor Daley has some small glimmer of understanding about bicycles, I think, but yet he's still, I don't know. I'm not. I can't really. I don't really know what I would do. I would say that an oil crisis, if for some reason the price of oil went up.
How far does it have to go up, though?
I asked my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law lives down in Alabama, and he and all of his family, my wife's family, are heavily motorized, and they all have big trucks, SUVs, RVs. So I asked him, at what point would he start thinking about some alternative? He said $5 a gallon, that he would try to carpool or figure out some alternative. But I think it would really be higher than that. I think they're so bound to it, they would just switch their resources from something else.
How much is a gallon of gas right now, do you know?
I don't know, what is it? I don't know, $1.60 or something? $2? I don't know. How much?
70, something like that.
I haven't bought any lately, I can't remember.
How much is the beer you're drinking?
I don't know, I didn't buy this, but like I say, the money I save on gas, I probably spend a good portion of it on beer, but I can drink good beer, and that's more pleasure than filling a gas tank. But yeah, on the policy issues, the conference, we had a number of people that came and gave, people that are really expert in the field. And they we went through some focus groups trying to, people were suggesting things about what you can do.
Yeah, that's actually quite dangerous.
I've got a doorknob at home now with this door.
I suppose at this point you just lobby. You write your congressman, you lobby. For example, there's a zoning. The city of Chicago is rewriting its zoning code. A lot of things in the zoning code affect whether cars are encouraged or discouraged by developers and stuff, commercial districts. So one way, some of us have been going to these meetings, and like participating and offering alternative suggestions for the zoning code, which would discourage the use of cars, like fewer strip malls in the city, for example, where retail stores would have to actually face right on the sidewalk rather than having a setback for cars. In other words, where the pedestrians would be able to enter into a store without going through a parking lot or a bunch of cars. It's a small thing, and then more bike paths and trying to establish car-free zones, areas of the city which are free for pedestrians and cyclists. Those kind of things to sort of demonstrate. Bikes on the L. We have bikes on the CTA on the L now for on weekends, so that's another small step forward. So
Weekends only?
Yeah, and people are working on Metra. Metra does not have a very enlightened bicycle policy, so even though CTA has agreed to carry bikes on weekends, Metra still is recalcitrant. So some of the people that ride that I know are working, trying to go to Metra meetings and try to influence that policy. So that's about the level we're at. Since we're mostly grassroots, none of us are really in positions of power, with a few exceptions. Some of us do have positions, but not real powerful. Our only method, I think, is just to go to meetings, write letters, make our voice heard, and get out in the street and attract attention. And when we attract people, you know, then we usually have a flyer or we have a loudspeaker or something to try to get get our message across that way.
Anything else you want to let me know, Jim?
Isn't that enough? Isn't it time? Bighorn's time to talk.
I'm asking you. Anything else you want to let me know?
I might, if I think of something else, I'll let you know. But
All right.
you pretty much covered it.
Tell me your name once more, real quick.
Jim Redd.
R-E-D?
R-E-D-D.
All right, thanks, man.
Okay. Thank you. Eric Anderson, Bighorn.
My name's Eric Anderson, aka Bighorn. It's my critical mass handle. I guess I'm here tonight to talk about bike culture in Chicago. My point of view has changed a little bit in the last couple of years. I started out, as Jim said, riding in the first critical mass ride here in Chicago in '97. And since then, I've actually been hired by the city's bicycle program. I am now working on the installation of bike racks all over Chicago. And I think in the year 2000, the big number is 6,000 bike racks. That's how many bike racks we currently have in Chicago, which is more than any other city in North America. It's not more than some cities in Amsterdam or in the Netherlands, for example, but definitely more than any other city in North America. Basically,
Back up. Is Chicago therefore ahead? I mean, bike locks an overall gauge of.
I think I wouldn't say that bike racks are necessarily the only indicator of where Chicago's at. From if you stack up the competition, other cities in North America may have more miles of bike lanes. They have more miles of off-street bike paths or other bike facilities than we have in Chicago. I think the Bay Area is widely regarded as sort of the North American mecca of cycling. They have an extensive transit program, bike lockers, bike paths, and a lot of different infrastructure. But, bike racks are really a key, sort of an anchor to any infrastructure for bikes. I mean, if you don't have a place to lock up your bike, a bike path or a bike lane is useless. You're not going to be able to get anywhere and keep your bike. As far as, how I encounter culture now in my role impersonating a bureaucrat is, we at the city, we have a very entrenched car culture bureaucracy. As Jim was saying, there is a huge amount of money and jobs tied up in the production of the car and the maintenance of its infrastructure. And, the city's Department of Transportation is a perfect example of that. We encounter car culture as a very real physical obstacle when we try to design a bike lane, when we try to put in bike parking in an area that comes into conflict with car parking. And the prioritization of car culture is, it's not just a fuzzy idea, you can talk about car culture or bike culture, but it gets played out in really concrete ways in specific policies and, in meetings every day where the priority for maintaining car transportation is definitely very high.
How many bicycles can fit being locked up in a space, one parking space?
It depends on the type of bike, but anywhere between 15 to 18 bikes in one car parking space. I've actually seen a photo of a bike rack in the Netherlands that's located on the street in place of a car parking spot, and I think there were probably at least 14 to 15 bikes on the rack, and it wasn't full. So, in terms of efficiency, it's definitely, from a parking or land use point of view, it's way more efficient. Definitely.
What is the city's official position?
On bicycles?
Yeah, what's the goal? What's the idea?
The idea, I think, is probably not so clearly articulated as some people would like, but there is there are some documents out there. The city has something called the Bike 2000 plan, which basically sets some goals. It's clear that the city has the improvement of bike facilities as a goal. It's in the plan. They want. We're supposed to add X number of bike lanes this year. We're supposed to reach 6,000 bike racks this year.
Did they meet their goals?
We met the bike rack and bike parking goals, but not the bike lane goals.
So where are some of the places that they set out to add bike racks to, and that have been done? What types of places?
Pretty much all over the city. There's a lot. Basically any business, especially places where the visit is short, like a video store, a grocery store, a cafe. And also a lot of sort of institutional places like schools is an excellent example of where bike parking is sort of a traditional thing. Kids ride their bikes to school, or at least they used to, and they need a place to lock their bike up that'll be secure. Also, a lot of different populations in Chicago bike. We were really surprised this year when we got a lot of requests for bike racks at CHA senior housing locations, which basically means that there's a whole population of seniors out there that bike as a form of transportation that needed a place to park. We had no idea they were out there until they started requesting bike racks.
What's the cost of a bike rack?
Basically depends on what type and where you get it, but a basic bike rack's anywhere from $150 to $175, including the cost of the time to install it, which is if you work it out, a lot cheaper than a parking garage.
And do you have any sense of what the budget for what's the name of the office that you're involved with the city?
Oh, I work specifically in the Bureau of Traffic, which is sort of ironic, at the Department of Transportation. So.
Are you a pariah there?
No, not really. And I think that my and my colleagues' behavior is always very conscious of that. The image that when we go into a meeting, I think people expect us to be
wearing helmets.
Yeah, or just just to be very self-righteous, and we don't give them the satisfaction. We actually have the luck to have a mayor who's really behind our program. He's often referred to as the city's first cyclist. He is an avid cyclist himself, and anytime I go out to have a meeting, with a community group or something like that. A lot of the time I'll say, well, I work for Mayor Daley's bike rack program, and as soon as I invoke the mayor's name, everyone understands. Well, it's the mayor. What are you going to do? You better put in some bike racks. So we're really fortunate in that regard that we have, that kind of support for the program.
10, 20, 50, 100 years from now, what do people need to know about the work that you're involved in?
Well, basically, I think the best, perspective is a historical one. It's sort of an interesting story, how we got to this position. The Eisenhower interstate system, made cars necessary to move between cities, and from there it just sort of exploded into something that's regarded as a necessity. I think that right now in the year 2000, we're in a position where the car is not only a dominant form of transportation, so it dominates our transportation culture, but in a lot of ways it also dominates our culture, pop culture, or just culture at large economically. And that's, in terms of people that are working for change, that's a big thing to come up against. If the situation had been different, perhaps there would be people, driving cars in a car critical mass, and everyone would be riding bikes. Originally, the roads were actually constructed for bicycles. It was originally cyclists who had argued for paved roads, simply because they're easier to ride a bike on. So that's where we are right now, and hopefully this will seem absurd to people 10 years, 15 years in the future.
Are you also an advocate of, or does your work also involve promoting public transportation in general?
It doesn't, because I focus specifically on bikes, but I've had the pleasure of working on a program installing bike racks at CTA stations. So I think where our program intersects public transit is with what we call the multimodal user, somebody who rides their bike to the CTA station, gets on the train, goes downtown to go to work, and then rides takes the train back to their bike, which they ride home. And that's really a model for what a lot of people see as the future, that we hopefully can get to in the next 10 or 15 years. Something where people have the legitimate option, to integrate forms of transportation, so that instead of throwing their bike on top of a car to go mountain biking or to go to a track and race, they could actually take their bike onto a regional rail line like Metra, which was what Jim was referencing, and get there. So it's really about options. That's where the intersection of our program is with stuff like mass transit.
What are the obstacles to putting bike racks on buses like you see in some other cities like Seattle and other places?
The obstacles are, I think, more institutional than they are real, I guess. Maybe that's not so clear, but the obstacles, I think, have to do with for example, the CTA's institutional unfamiliarity with how a bike rack works on a bus. Issues of liability, issues of training drivers. Any large organization is very loath to change if they don't have to. So they might think it's a great idea, but they might not know how to get there. But actually the CTA in its current budget does have money for a retrofit of their entire bus line to install bike racks. So it's a good step. We'll see if that budget goes through.
Wow, what's the budget, proposed budget, or
Yeah.
for 2000?
2001. Yeah.
And what's your idea as part of that? If they propose it for 2001, say it gets passed by the city council,
Right.
when is that likely to be implemented?
I would imagine they would start implementing in 2001, and hopefully it would be, the first step. A retrofit of cars to make it easier to take bikes onto train cars would be a great thing. My main concern as a cyclist is to not inconvenience transit users. And sometimes when you take your bike on the train, it can be a little tight, but as long as everybody works together, it's okay. It'd be nice if it was even easier, if there was extra space given over to make it easier for people to take their bike on the train.
How significant would that be to be able to bring bikes on buses?
I think
Or put them on a rack on the exterior of a bus?
I think it's fairly significant. I think that the problem, from my point of view, my personal point of view, I'm not all that excited about the bike rack on bus program, mainly because if I'm on a bike, I can always beat a bus, period. There is no bus in the city that's faster than me, or most people that I know that ride a bike, and that includes the slowest person that I know. The reason is just because buses are stuck in car traffic. If car traffic was lighter, then I might be more excited about it because it might actually become a viable alternative. But I think as soon as you start sacrificing the efficiency of what a bike gives you in terms of speed of transportation and directness, then you're sort of getting back to, well, I might as well be in a car if I'm going to put my bike on a bus.
Do you feel that way?
Right now I do, definitely. I highly doubt that I'll ever use the bike racks on buses. However,
In terms
it's
of
not-
mainstreaming the idea that more people.
right, it's definitely a great first step. And I mean, I'm a pretty aggressive cyclist, and that doesn't mean that there aren't lots of people out there who will get tons of use out of them. Just because I'll never use it doesn't mean that other people won't. So I think it's definitely a good idea.
How much do bikes cost these days? I mean, I know that there's some that cost thousands of dollars. But
Right.
for average Joe who begins thinking, thinks that they want, they see a critical mass and it sparks an idea. I haven't ridden a bike in 10 years. I'd like to get one that's appropriate for.
That's one of the great things about bicycle commuting is you could pick up a used bike for $50 that would get you around town just fine. I have an old British-made Raleigh 3-speed with fenders, and I ride it in the rain. It cost me $15, and all I had to do was replace the tires. I think you can go from there all the way up to the top. I think some of the most expensive bikes you can get that are in regular production, can be $3,000 or $4,000. But that's the Rolls-Royce of bicycles, and that's nothing compared to what the Rolls-Royce would cost you. So, I mean, in terms of the cost, you can have the nicest ride on the road for a fraction of what it would cost you to have the nicest SUV. Basically.
Or even the worst.
Or even the worst, sure. Especially if you think about maintenance. Here at Rapid Transit, they charge $75 for a tune-up, and if you get 2 of those per year, your bike should work pretty much perfectly. And if you're going to pay $150 in maintenance on a vehicle that you only paid $200 for, then you're not paying for gas or insurance, and
$1 a day.
yeah, basically cheaper than the CTA, which is unfortunate. But. All right, man. Take care. But actually, we get a shot of that thing over there. That's kind of nice.
Show me.
This is the lovely Rapid Transit insignia here that was designed and built by Ron Labello, one of the mechanics here at the shop. Rapid Transit's a really interesting place because it's really a haven for a lot of us from critical mass, and it's a place where bike culture is really nurtured. Lots of different kinds of bike culture. We've got exotic recumbent bicycles, like these that can cost you $3,000 or $4,000. High performance recumbents, racing, bikes like these, but also, a whole line of commuter bicycles that are specifically designed for getting from point A to point B, getting from home to work to the store and back. And unlike most shops, if you come here and you say, well, I want to start riding my bike to work, they know what to do. If you go to a shop where you have a bunch of gearhead mountain bikers, no offense to them, because I'm sort of one of them, but they won't have the foggiest idea what you're talking about. So it's definitely a haven of bike culture here.
How often do you get a flat tire?
Not very often. Usually once every couple months. And I don't know, on average I probably ride about 100 to 150 miles a week, depending. So, a lot of riding. Just learn how to dodge the glass.
Anything else you want to let me know?
No, not really. That's about it.
All right, tell me your name again and where we are.
Eric Anderson. We're at Rapid Transit Cycle Shop in Chicago, Illinois.
What part of the city?
This is the Wicker Park neighborhood.
All right, thanks, Stu.
Sure. Yeah, I'm probably going to take off here in about 15 minutes. Yeah. Okay.
This is how you do it. You have to remember which order to put things on. First the balaclava, then the goggles, then the helmet.
Check these pants out, Jim. Waterproof, cargo pockets, and zip-off legs.
Oh man,
Cool, huh?
these yours?
Yep, just got them.
How much do they cost you?
$60. That's it.
Get those here?
Cheaper than a pair of designer jeans. No, I didn't actually. They came from a mail order outlet. But exciting.
Okay,
Take care. Good to meet you, dude.
all right, thanks, and wish you success in this thing. I hope you're...
Yeah, go check out the show. It's going to be at the Cultural Center. I think it'll be good.
It's gonna open January the 1st, right?
Yep. It'll be open for the first 10 weeks or so of the year.
You're not gonna have the video there. I mean, it's just gonna be...
There will be some video, but not this.
Not that? Okay. All right.
All right, take care, dude.
Okay, Big Lawrence,